recognizing that there's so much that that we're really covering here. But I want to make sure that what we do cover makes sense. So, and I will be making sure that there's like video from Kabbalistic experts, like rational, realistic, clear experts with some more videos on some of these subjects. So those will be linked on the website too, on our Jewish Journey text website. Um, so yeah, we talked about the development of these ideas, and today we're really going to look at some of these ideas in kind of a deeper way. Um, and what I really want to talk about today is some of the key elements to Kabbalah that really are like the basic building blocks, and some of the things that are really important for us to be familiar with when we're studying. And so that's what we're going to do a little bit today is do some of those, and then some of what we don't get through today will probably spill over into next week. And then on top of that, next week I really want to show how does this stuff appear, like how do you understand this, or what things you've seen in our prayers and in our lives that have these elements. I think you'll see some of them today too, but next week I really want to point out what this means for us today, um, where it goes. And so again, last week we talked about one of those important concepts, which is the olamot, the worlds, the different dimensions that we exist in at any given time, because it kind of helps us understand like why we experience things on a kind of like a normal level most of the time, kind of our plugged in into the physical world level. Um, and I like that concept because I really believe that. I really believe that there's different ways of kind of experience things simultaneously, or sometimes we're experiencing them in different ways, even though, again, it's not that they're different. It's just it's not that we're in a different place. We're in the same place. We're just experiencing it in a different way through a different dimension. And it was again. Let me just show real quick the levels, if you will, with the highest level being the level of Atzilut, where there's no difference between ourselves and God, where we completely feel united, and that energy is there's no separation. Um, the level of Asiya, which is the physical realm that we live in most of the time, that's a really important level because that's where we live. But we understand that there's another level above, and another level above that, and another level above that. And at that level, when we're at the highest level, what we call Atzilut, we're part of a complete union with God. We're literally like living in complete connection with God. It's impossible to live like that all the time. We just couldn't handle it. We also There would be nothing. We'd be we wouldn't do anything other than just constantly be plugged in, and look, obviously there's people who try to do that, and sometimes they try to do that with drugs, and they sometimes try to do that with different things that aren't healthy for them, but they're searching for that constant energy. Yeah, Philip. Yeah. It's a good question. At some point, there's kind of an understanding in Kabbalah that you kind of leave this world, and it's one of the explanations why when people have attained that kind of union that they don't live very long. We're going to talk about one of them right now, actually, um, and that is, well, let me get this other. No, no, no. They've essentially they don't need to be here anymore. No, their spark is out of this world. Like we don't see that spark anymore. It's gone. They die, but they'll die at, well, we'll talk about one of them right now. The Ari, the most famous of the Kabbalistic rabbis. Um, the one who's responsible for what we call Lurianic Kabbalah because his name was Isaac Luria. And he's the guy that's all over Svat. There are synagogues that he prayed in, there's a place where he's buried, there are things all around Svat that are testimony to the Ari. He's called the Ari, which literally means lion, right? But it's an acronym, Aleph Resh Yud, which stands for uh, the Ashkenazi Rabbi Yitzhak. So he was an Ashkenazi Jew that lived in Israel. He was born in Jerusalem in 1534. His father was Ashkenazi. His mother was actually Sephardic. What's interesting is most of the Jews that lived in Israel at that time were Sephardic Jews. And many of them had left. This is 1534, folks. They left Spain. So when we talk about Sephardic Jews, these are Jews that literally were in Spain or their parents were born in Spain and they escaped. In 1492, the expulsion of the Jews, right? The expulsion, not the Inquisition. The Inquisition had been going on for 200 years already. The expulsion of the Jews happened in 1492, the same year that Columbus left, and the reason to some extent that Columbus left. They don't think anymore, Mike. It's been proven. The DNA was proven, and it was proven like I think a year ago. I mean, it was you know about this, right? You're looking at me like I'm making this up, guys. Wait a second. This was all. No, no, no. They know. Oh, they know. What are you? No, this was okay. So I'm just we're gonna go. We're gonna go. Um, yeah, just a very quick. No, no, it's fine. It's very important. Um, okay, so it's 15 months ago. So I'm just going to show you. Look, I want to show you sites that like some Jewish. It's on the Times of Israel. I'm not going to show you the Times of Israel. Any news site, somebody's going to say, well, I don't trust that site. But I look, this is not a Jewish news site. I'm going to show you. This is uh, this is CNN. Okay, yeah, October 13th, 2024. Sephardic Jew from Western Europe, Spanish scientist said on Saturday after using DNA analysis to tackle a centuries old myth. It wasn't a mystery. It was a mystery only because the Spanish claimed him, the Italians claimed him. But anyone who knew history, I've been telling you for a long time that Columbus was Jewish. The DNA proves it. Yes, yes. They took it from his body, and they went to people who claimed to be Columbus's descendants. Good question. Where his grave is? No, he's buried in Sevilla. He's buried in Seville, and but there is a place in I think the Dominican Republic that they also say. So here it says he wished to be buried on the island of Hispaniola, today Dominican Republic. His remains were taken there, and they were moved to Cuba, and then it's long thought that they were moved to Sevilla in 1898. So I've been to his grave. I mean, anybody who goes to Sevilla, you're supposed to go to his grave. It's like in the cathedral there. It's a beautiful cathedral in Seville. Ironically, by the way, major Jewish city until 1492. It was a major Jewish community in Sevilla. So yeah, Columbus was Jewish. We know it. The DNA has told us this now. So it took obviously finding the DNA to confirm it. But like the evidence was so obvious. It was so obvious. Um, so yeah, so in 1492, Jews got out of Spain, had no choice. They either had three choices: convert, get killed, or leave. And a lot of them left, and a lot of them went to Holland. A lot of them went to the, the they went to the New World to try to get away from the Inquisition and the expulsion. And a lot of them went to the Ottoman Empire. At the time in 1492 and 1500s, Israel was controlled by the Ottoman Empire. So the Ari went to, his parents came to Israel, or his father settled in Israel. I think his mother was already living there, his mother's family. And so he was born there in 1534, literally 34, 30, 50 years, 40 years after. What? I did not know him. His father died when he was very young, unfortunately, but he was sent to Egypt to be educated by his uncle, who was a pretty wealthy guy. And he studied, he studied Talmud, he studied the Kabbalah, he studied the Zohar, which by that point was maybe 300 years old, 250 years old, but very important to Sephardic Jews because it was written by Isaac Cordovero, Isaac de Leon, Isaac of Cordova. He wrote it in Aramaic, but the language of the Talmud, but it was studied by Jews from that area of Spain and France. And look, the community in Israel at the time, like much of the Jewish community that was exiled from Spain, was traumatized. I mean, they were dealing with the loss of their home. And Jews had lived in Spain uninterrupted for hundreds of years. I mean, at least 700 years. We have Jewish evidence of Jewish life in Spain from the 700s, but probably back to the Roman era. Actually, probably, if you want to know, probably even back to the early Greco-Roman era. Really, I mean, some of the earliest cities in Europe that were settled by people who were from the other parts of the Mediterranean were Carthaginian cities, and there were probably Jews that were parts of those cities too. So, anyways, they were thrown out of Spain. They were dealing with that trauma. They watched their family being murdered in some cases, and it was traumatic time. It was like living after the Holocaust. And so, with the differences is where do we go? What's going to happen? But there were people during that time who did think that something big was going to happen. That after this horrible trauma, that something big would happen. And you can imagine we did have something big that happened after our Holocaust, as we had the rebirth of Israel. Well, they didn't have that, but they thought that that would happen. They thought the Messiah was maybe going to come during that time. And so there was a lot of messianic speculation. There was a lot of spiritual yearning, and there was a desire to make sense of this trauma. How do we make sense of this? Because look, we're already in exile. We're already in exile. It wasn't the first time. The Crusades had already happened, and the Inquisition started hundreds of years earlier. But this was a major trauma. By the way, I want just you to understand too. The Jewish community in Spain at one point was 10% of the population in the Middle Ages. 10% of Spain was Jewish. That's a higher percentage than the United States. It's 5 times higher. It's like the percentage of New York. So you can imagine a community that's so entrenched in their home, in the places that they lived, that 10% of the population went through this kind of trauma. Now, there's similar things that happened in Warsaw and Damascus and other cities in the 1940s that were completely overrun, and there was pogroms and there was Jews that were chased out. But it's that level. It's literally as if there was a pogrom in New York and the Jews were all chased out of New York. That's what it was. It was a place where they thought that was their home. And they were enough of them that, they thought they were secure. So it was a major shock. And so theologically, they also needed a response to that, just like we did after the Holocaust, and that's what was going on during this time. So the Jews who were living in Israel, just like they were living in other places, were trying to figure that out. But the people that were living in Israel literally thought that if they engaged in kind of holy activity, that they could literally bring the Messiah to them in Israel. I mean, this was a big deal. And actually, we don't talk about it a lot, but in the 1600s, about 100 years after this, there was a false Messiah in the Jewish community his name was Shabbatai Tzvi, who came out of this community. He was, again, 100 years later. But this was still such a big part of it that he literally was able to get thousands of Jews to follow him. And the effect of what he had by having a false messianic revolution also had a huge impact on the Jewish community. We don't talk about it a lot because it was an embarrassing situation for us, but it had a big effect. They caught Shabbatai Tzvi, the Turks caught him, arrested him, put him in jail, and forced him to convert to Islam. And his followers also converted to Islam, but secretly were practicing Judaism, their own Shabbatai Tzvi version of Judaism, and they were doing it for a while. There's a theory that even I think still is not talked about necessarily a lot, but that Kemal Ataturk, the father of secular Turkey, was descendant of those people. He was very well inclined to the Jewish community, which is one of the reasons why people thought that he was part of these descendants of Shabbatites, fee followers. But that kind of manifestation comes out of this quest and desire to make sense of this horrible tragedy. And out of that also comes Lurianic Kabbalah. And so this dude did not write anything. Everything that was written down that he said was written down by his student, whose name was Chaim Vital. It's part of a text that he wrote that he basically taught Lurianic Kabbalah, his teacher Luria's teachings, in something that was called the Etz Chaim, because his name was Chaim. So Etz Chaim means the tree of Chaim, tree of life, but it's also a play on his name. Lots of the things that we have in Kabbalah, Kabbalistic texts and commentaries are named after the writers, but sometimes in clever ways, in plays on their names and on acronyms and things like that. We'll get to that. But again, yeah, this guy Chaim Vital wrote his teacher's things, and in some cases, Luria's job was to kind of develop and kind of bring things together that had existed in Kabbalah up until that point. But he also introduced some things to Kabbalah, which is why we call it Lurianic Kabbalah. So he didn't invent everything, but he tried to put it in together in a system. And by doing so, he actually added some elements which hadn't necessarily been there before. And also isn't necessarily he invented it, but that he synthesized it and he kind of brought things together and tried to make it understandable and tried to create a better system. Because again, Kabbalah is a system. It's a way of approaching things, which is not quite philosophy. It's not quite religion, because it's still Judaism. Though I will tell you, part of why I'm telling you this is because next week, in our final week of Kabbalah, and we talk about what does it mean for us today, the Kabbalist Research Center in Los Angeles that Madonna was a part of, and Demi Moore and all these other people, has tried to show the Kabbalistic system outside of Judaism. It's tried to teach it to people and say, you don't really have to be Jewish to understand Kabbalah. I have an issue with that. We'll get to it next week. But Luria's big addition to Kabbalah that we see articulated by him is that when God made creation, there's a question. How does God create? If God is unending, if God is Ein Sof, which is what we talked about last week, the unending, infinite God. If God is everywhere, if God is energy, how could anything be created? Where was there a space for anything in the material world if everything is God? So how did creation happen? Well, he came up with a concept of what we call tzimtzum, which is contraction, divine contraction. And what God did was kind of condense the divine presence to allow for there to be space for the physical world. Now, what happened in that was that as God was creating this energy, and where is this in the text? In the very beginning. When God created, it says that God created light. Well, what happens is that when God contracted and created an empty space, what we call halal punui, the empty space, that allowed for God to be creating things. And what God created was something that we have actually read about before, which are what's called the Sfirot, the 10 crowns or the 10 lights. And that's in the Zohar. So the idea of Sfirot is already in the Zohar. The Zohar tells us about these 10 emanations, which we're going to get to. I'm going to lay them out for you in a second. First, I need to explain to you the Tzimtzum, the divine contraction. And I know this is going to be hard. So there's not really a good way to show this because, quite frankly, it's not really, it was before there was even anything. So what happens is everything, all of God's energy is brought in a little bit so that there can be this space for the physical world. The problem is God creates these sphirot, which the job of the sphirot is to essentially hold divine energy. It's supposed to, they're vessels that are supposed to hold the divine energy. The problem was God creates that first energy, that first light, which in Kabbalah, in this Luriana Kabbalah is called the Kav, this light. The light is too much for the Sfirot, and the Sfirot blow up. They blow up. Now, of course, people have said, well, that sounds a lot like the Big Bang. Well, there are Kabbalists who say that's exactly what it is. It's the energy that couldn't be contained in that first atom. So the energy explodes, and what we're left with are these broken vessels, what we call kalim, and they were broken. Those broken vessels essentially become everything that we see. It becomes the physical world. It becomes matter. It becomes rocks and trees and eventually any living thing. The vessels themselves are holy. They're part of God, but they're not, they're essentially energy sources that have, as the Eitz Chaim, this is what Luria described, the vessels could not contain the light and shattered, and sparks fell into the lower realms. Now, God did. Correct. So there's a problem here, right? Which is that how does God create something that breaks? What? So where does this come from? It's a good question, right? Well, the genesis of this comes from a very important question, which is it seems like, first of all, the first question I already told you is if God is everywhere, how could there be space for anything to exist? So you have to explain that first. So if God is everywhere and God was everything, how was there space for creation? So that's the first thing. The second one, though, is based on this idea, which is one that lots of people believed in, and we're going to get to this. I think I want to wrap up with this idea of where it played out, was this idea that the material world is essentially not the way it should be. And maybe it's not supposed to be here at all. And this is an idea that was part of what we call Gnosticism. This is classical Gnosticism. These are ideas that, I mean, they developed to some extent in Persia, but then also really important in Greece, and was a very big part of early Christianity. Though early Christianity had a big problem with it and went against it and destroyed it. But it's essentially, it's based on this issue, John, which is how does a God who seems to be all good and seems to be all powerful create a world where there's so much dysfunction, where there's so much brokenness, where there's so much evil, where there's so much things that don't make sense? And so Gnosticism, classical Gnosticism, essentially kind of came up with a concept that there's a demiurge, that there's a lesser God that creates things and essentially is either evil or ignorant and doesn't know what it's doing. And by the way, just so you know, there were Jews and Christians who believed this fervently, and we don't know much about them because they were kind of purged out of the community. But they looked at some of the things in the Bible and they say, well, why is God called Elohim sometimes and in other places called Adonai? There's two kinds of things going on here. And so there were people who read the Torah that way. I'm not saying you should. We have another answer, which is that Elohim was what the northern Israelite author calls God, and Adonai is what the southern Judean people called God. It's the E and J hypothesis, part of the documentary hypothesis. But look, there were people who said, why is there two names for God? Well, they didn't want to say there were two authors. So there's two different gods being described. And so this is one issue, which is, hey, if God's everywhere, how could there be creation? The second issue, how could there be bad stuff in a world that God makes? So Kabbalistic idea was never going to say that God was evil, but what it says is God, and this is the, if you will, this is the mythic element to it, but there's a logic to it, which is it's not that God made a mistake, it's that God kind of underestimated the power of God's own energy. And so God created something that couldn't contain God. And so because of that, you have this you have this rupture. You have this rupture, which isn't the way things are supposed to be. That creates all matter. Yeah. Yeah. So the matter is still holy, by the way, because again, in some of the Gnostic teachings, everything that you see is bad. The only thing that's really good is the essence or the energy behind it, and that is good. Okay, but okay, fine. But for people who like this idea of matter being evil, you know what the consequence to that is, by the way. I was going to wait to get here. Everything being evil, everything that you see being evil. It means that everybody who engages in everything that is creative is continuing this bad cycle. Why are you laughing? Uh-huh. Yeah. It's only half baked. Well, yeah, there's a bigger issue, which is that, look, this existed within forms of Christianity for a long time. Because to some extent, when people look at very ascetic behaviors of some of these monks, what were they doing? They were pulling themselves out of the physical world. They were just praying. They didn't want to have children. They didn't want to procreate. Now, I'm telling you this because there's actually, like, this is very relevant because did it win a Golden Globe? I didn't really pay attention. Uh, Amanda Seyfried's Confessions, the Anne Lee, this thing that she did about the Shaker, the leader of the Shakers. Does anybody out there seen this movie? Nobody saw it. Anybody out there? It's it got. I mean, she's got a lot. She produced it in it. No, no, no. It's called The Testament of Anne Lee. So Anne Lee is an interesting lady because she was born in England. She came to this country. It's this movie right here. She started a religious movement. I mean, how many women start religious movements? She started a religious movement. It's not only a religious movement. Think about it. It's architectural. It's a artistic style. Shaker. This is the movie. So Anne Lee was a woman who was, raised as a Christian in England, and was part of the spiritual awakening that was going on during the 1800s. She taught that the spirit is pure. Kind of came out of the Quakers, by the way. The Quakers were a little bit like this, but they were not like the Shakers. But Anne Lee taught that all sexual desire is wrong. Any kind of procreation, any kind of sex, and she made her community completely celibate. John does not want to see this. Yeah, so they nobody had kids. They could bring kids in who wanted to be Shakers, but yeah, this is why the movement didn't last because, but it was very popular for a while. People were joining Shaker communities all over New York and Massachusetts because there was something amazing about it because it was the energy there that they were creating was basically saying we have the potential now to get rid of our sexual desire. We have the potential to, in this new country, kind of create a religion of light. And it was very popular. The movie just came out. Yeah, it just came out. Came out this last year. So it's supposedly great. So nobody has seen it, right? Okay. Well, I think it's got. Let's see. I'll tell you. What does it say there? It has a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't know, whatever, but it's got a great it's got but it's an interesting thing because a lot of people don't know about the Shakers. They know about like Shaker furniture. They know about the Shakers. But they were really kind of the last version of this Gnosticism, which said that the stuff. So look, they're the last popular version of it, but it doesn't go away. I mean, there's elements of it in other forms of Christianity that came around that time, like especially Latter Day Saint movement, and for the Mormons, there was definitely some elements of this. But this idea that the spiritual world is underneath all of this was very much, it's obviously what you see in Kabbalah. But Gnosticism basically says it's wrong, it's bad. Whereas Kabbalah says you got to go deeper. But the layers, the language, the myths are very similar. But again, Gnosticism says get out, Kabbalah says go deeper. You know, Kabbalah says sex between consenting adults that love each other elevates the spherode. It helps bring healing. Whereas the Shakers would say, don't do it. Don't do it. You know, Kabbalistic elements would say that having a child can help repair the world because if the child brings more healing and more work towards healing the world, then your child is actually going to help elevate these sparks. So it's the reverse to some extent, even though it's the same kind of like stories. The learning from it, the teaching is totally different. So, you know, it's interesting that again, some of this is played out, and it played out not in a necessarily, you know, the healthiest way for well, it didn't play out didn't play out in a healthy way for the Shakers, but anyways, yeah, well, but for a while they were really popular. Um, no, so so back to Luria and this idea, the so the energy breaks up these spherot, and then the spherot are rebuilt. God rebuilds the spherot with a system where the spherot will now be balanced because why they broke was because they couldn't contain the energy because they weren't balanced. They weren't arranged in the right way. And so this is one of the things that Luria gives us, which is this idea that if there's a balance and integration, then they can then you can have you can have existence. You can have there can be something that we see and exist in the world without things going crazy. So what he has is a layout for the Sphirot, which uh, which he says is the way that these um, these can be these can exist. Um, so this is kind of the rebuilt Sphirot around this model. And if you notice, there's a left and right side, and the left and right sides are very important. Now, I will tell you that there are some slightly different versions of this model. These are not always exactly written the same way. This is one that I think is pretty standard, so that's why I'm using this one. Um, and I like the way this is kind of laid out. So again, this is a structure which allows everything to exist on a in a way that will keep creation from blowing apart again. So this map exists kind of on a heavenly level, but it also exists on a map on our own bodies. So there's actually an overlay of this on our own bodies. So at the top, at the head, is what we call the Keter, the crown. And this is where we connect most with the Holy One. This is where the energy kind of enters into the system. Through that, um, through that first point of entry, which is the most connected in some ways to God, but they're all needed, because if they don't all exist and they don't exist in balance, then it goes crazy. We have on one side we have Bina, which is understanding, and on the other side we have Chokhmah, which is wisdom. Um, Below Chokhmah, and again, all of these are connected. All of these have lines of connection between each other. Below Chokhmah is Chesed, which is love. On the other side is Gvura, which is judgment or strength. In the middle, between them, is something called Tiferet, which is beauty, sometimes also understood as compassion. Now, these are not gods. I mean, some people were like, well, you're talking about God there's like 10 ways of talking about God. No, this is the way God's energy manifests in this world. You know, some people say, well, that sounds like the Trinity. No, but there are people who said it sounded like you're saying there's 10 gods now. No, because nobody talks about these as God. They talk about these as channels for how God manifests, emanates, if you will, energy. So Tiferet is in the middle, or is the balance between Gvura and Chesed. Then below Gvura you have Hod, which is splendor, and then below Chesed you have Netzach, which is eternity or prophecy. Below that, in the middle, is Yesod, the foundation, which is sometimes also where the procreative energy comes from, in the foundation. And what you sometimes have here, and you notice in this chart, you have something that's called Shekhinah. Sometimes this is called Malchut, as it's on some charts it doesn't say Shekhinah, it says Malchut. This one has the feminine word for it. This side here connects back with this side here. So it doesn't end, it wraps back around, so that from Shekhinah or Malchut, you go back to Keter. So, yes. Yeah, so Kabbalah teaches that the way that we get um, 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 I just want to show one thing. It's where, again, where some people would say where prophecy comes out as a way of communicating with God, and one of the reasons why it was seen there in that part of the body was because when prophets would kind of do their job, they would it would sometimes manifest as hold on one second. It would sometimes manifest as that part of the body being aroused, if you will, during prophecy. So I'll just show you a very quick outline of this on the human body. Um, Again, some of this is going to look a little like chakra points, but it's a similar kind of idea, if you will. So these are all in the head area, in the brain, in the mind, in the top of the body. This is where you start going through the top half, the arms, Netzach and Chod. These are parts of the body that, are like the liver and the kidneys. And then Yesod, again, procreative, and Malchut, which here it says Malchut, but on the other one it says Shekhinah. So this is how it overlays on the body, and you know this is a concept that again exists in Kabbalah, which is that um, the body, um, the body and the world essentially are connected. And so to have an overlay of the body, let me just show you one thing back on the on this model. There are people who spend a lot of time. So when we go to Sfat next time, you'll see this all over the place. You'll see people with drawings of this Sefirot all over the place. This map. You'll see it in the synagogues. You'll see it in the. You'll see it in the. I always point it out when we go into the synagogues. You'll see this chart in the stained glass. There's a lot of people who spend a lot of time studying about the Sefirot and trying to like meditate on these different aspects of God's emanations and focusing on, like say, today I'm going to be focusing on Tiferet. Today I'm going to be focusing on Chesed. But one of the takeaways from this, though, I think is you'll understand is that it was very important to understand that God's energy needed to kind of find the way to channel through existence without blowing things up. And this again is the way to do that. This is the way to keep that energy flowing without there being explosions, and to keep everything balanced, to keep everything in the right way. And this was a really important idea, which kind of explains why sometimes when things seem to be going out awry, it's because these balances aren't in the right way. So, for example, like Chesed and Gvura. Chesed is love, kindness, goodness, good energy, very positive energy, very heartfelt, right? On the other side is Gvura, which is judgment and strength. Well, if God had created the world only with judgment, none of us could stand being in a world where we'd have to be judged all the time by God and we would be destroyed. So God balances it with chesed. But if the world was only with chesed, right, and no judgment, there'd be complete chaos. Because if people did whatever they wanted to do and there was no punishment for them, there'd be chaos. So God can't just say, we're only going to rule by chesed, by love. So you have to balance it. Chesed and Gvura have to be in balance. So a lot of these were kind of laid out on the chart to explain why you have these balances, these sides, if you will, but they're not like in opposition to each other, but they're both needed in order to keep everything flowing right. Yeah. Yeah. I think people are still searching for it. I think, look, on a macro level, absolutely. People in this period of time, they needed this because they had to explain how their whole world came apart. Um, and so that asks that question. But anybody who goes through trauma, anybody who's trying to make sense of loss and who's trying to make sense of are oftentimes looking for systems. And so the system that explains why when things are off, where they're out of whack, um, they try to work on this. And so, like, again, I'm going to talk about it next week. The Kabbalah Center will tell people, okay, you need to go. And again, if this sounds like, well, like Scientology, it is, and it's the same people that oftentimes get attracted to Scientology, to go home and start meditating on chesed, go home and start meditating on Tiferet, and they'll give people work to do on focusing on some aspect, some emanation, which again, some of it makes sense to, you know, have these kinds of things to, to think about. They're not, none of these are bad, but yeah, they become systems for people in their trauma in that moment. So these are this system, right? This system that people had was very, very important to kind of explain how, how do we, how do we continue on? How do we move on from in our lives? How do we, how can we continue? So, um, yeah, it's a lot. Any questions out there from people, by the way, that are not here? We have a lot of people here who are asking questions. Anybody there needs to have anything explained a little bit more? That we went over some of this a little too fast so far. I know. I apologize that we did. We kind of went with the flow, the energy flow of this as well. But I want to make sure I didn't go over this too fast. So again, to some extent, this system allows for us to think about how God could create things if everything was already God. So it's one explanation for creation. And again, when we read creation story in a few weeks, it'll stick out in your mind again, maybe. Because the creation story we have is not a scientific story by any stretch of the imagination, but it's definitely trying to explain why did God create, not the how God created, but the why God created it. But there's still questions about why God created it. And was God happy with the way it all went down? So keep that in mind. But no questions out there? Anybody? Okay. Yes, Philip.
Had such a popularity in Hollywood for that moment in time.
Yeah. So why is it? Why did Kabbalah Center go through such a big a boost in popularity? We will talk about it next time because I want to talk about that and give some time just to that issue of how it plays out. But the short answer is because some very big celebrities got involved at the time. I mean, when Madonna got involved with Kabbalah Center, she was at the height of her popularity. This wasn't just Madonna today. This was Madonna 30 years ago when she was everywhere and everything. And so for somebody to come out and tell people, this is helping me run my life, and I'll show you what she did with it because she actually wrote music about it. She wrote a song about the Sefirot and and literally what we just read, or what I just read to you from Loriana Kabbalah. So understand that we it is a great question, Philip, but it is jumping the gun a little bit, but but it is a great point because it is very important, and it is oh, okay. I'm just going to share a piece of it right now. It's too much because we just started this. I have to share it. Here you go.
Got a silver
Yeah, quicker than a ray of light. That's what she did. She said, what is that energy that you feel when you're in balance? That's what she's talking about, the ray of light. I mean, she talked about it. It's not like I'm giving you what I think she said. She said that was based on her studies of Kabbalah. Now, for the most part, most of what she shared, at least to the public, was, pretty positive things about the system. But um, let's talk about what it is before we like, talk about how it played out in popular music that most people didn't even understand. But what's really important about what Luria tried to do is he tried to show that um, not only are these sparks kind of the explanation for why things seem a little out of whack in our world, but he also wanted people to understand that it's our job to help liberate those sparks and to create a wholeness and a healing with that. And this is why what I was going to wait to, which is tell you why this is different than Gnostic dualism, why is this is different than the Shakers, is because we have the power as human beings to elevate these sparks. It's what we call tikkun olam. Now, most people think that tikkun olam means doing good things. We always talk about tikkun olam as going out and doing social action. It's repairing the world. It sounds like we're repairing, literally, like, helping somebody. But that's not what tikkun olam means. That's not what, when Luria was speaking about it, he literally was saying this line right here. Through mitzvot and intention, the sparks are elevated and restored. Now, this is important because when you do the mitzvah, it helps do that right away. If you intend to do it with that, and if you bring intention to it, it's even better. And it's what we call kavanah. It's intention in doing something. So, look, you can eat food, and you're elevating that spark. By eating food, he taught, and as I said, by having sex with intention, you're elevating the sparks in this world. You're elevating the energy. You're bringing the energy back to God. So it happens, but when it really happens, and when we're like really moving the energy and even more of it, is when we recognize and intend to do that. So when we say a blessing, a bracha before we eat, and take that intentionality of saying, thank you, God, for this food I'm about to eat, I'm going to do something special with it. Now, if this sounds stupid to you, understand this. When you eat food, you are converting raw materials into calories, into energy that keeps your body moving. Whether you look at that as a Kabbalistic exercise of tikkun, or if you look at it from a scientific standpoint, you are turning food into energy in your body. That is in my mind, that is an amazing thing to consider. We don't think about it. We just go around and eat. I'm going to eat. I'm going to drink. Do it. But to think that that energy is being converted to food. By the way, of course, if you can't eat food, and if you are having problems digesting food, or if you're having problems eating certain foods, I had a cousin who died very young because she converted proteins into ammonia. It killed. I mean, it would kill you. By the time they discovered it, she almost died, and she ended up dying very young, anyways. But when the system doesn't work in your body, then you really appreciate it. But when it's working, you oftentimes don't think about it, right? Most of the time, we never think about it, but it is happening. And from the mystical side and the spiritual side and the Kabbalistic side, it's even more important because it's not just the physical energy that you're creating, but there's a spiritual energy that you're also creating. Because as your body is a vessel for God, and that food was too, it's just, you're a little bit more aware of it. You're conscious of it. You're the one that's actually has the ability to be partners with God in this. Now, if you think that that's a radical idea, it is. Because this idea that human beings are part of God's creation means that we actually have the ability to mess up God's creation. That we're working in tandem with God, but we also can work in opposition to God. And so that's a really dangerous thing. And that's something that we recognize is also within our power. So, as God's actions in this world are oftentimes done through us, we have the ability to help fix these things, help fix this energy, or we can make more problems with it. So, without getting into too many details about this, because it's the bad side of us, we have the ability to do bad things with that energy as well. So, um, it's well, that's not the Kabbalistic idea. From the Kabbalistic idea, I guess you could say God isn't going to interfere, but the idea that you have that power means that whether you like it or not, you're working as God's agent in this world, and if you choose not to do it or you're doing it the wrong way, you're just you can also destroy things. Um, so the rupture already happened. The brokenness had already happened. The question again of whether we're going to fix it, whether we're going to actually work towards repairing it, or we're going to continue to create a cycle of brokenness and break more things, because we like have the power to break things too, or to make that stuff like. Think about it this way: the kalim, these broken vessels, are really great. It's a great image because think about it. If somebody gives you it, what are they comparing it to? They're comparing it. The vessel was literally like a jug. You have a jug, breaks, can't contain the liquid. It can't contain. It's now broken. Well, you can either start fixing that jug. Nowadays, we're not going to fix anything. We're gonna throw it away. But let's say we're going to fix it. We start putting the pieces back together. We start assembling. We start gluing the pieces back together. Or you can step on it and make it even more fragmentary, less likely to be able to put together. So that's using that image of broken vessels. Think about it. So you have a piece of glass. You can either put it together with the next piece of glass and try to put this together, which you can. So this is something that can be reassembled, or you can decide to step on it and make it even harder to reassemble. And you're making the next generation, you're making the next person, whoever you're going to pass this thing on to, it's going to be harder for them to put it back together. So, um, it's not overly complex. It's a system. You're right. Can be if you make it that way, but it's really interesting that to me, what we're looking for is a way of trying to explain. Well, do my actions matter? And the Kabbalistic teaching are 100% matters, and you actually have a job to do that. And Luria said each soul is sent to complete what no other person can complete. So you have pieces and access to pieces. Sometimes, well, you are a piece of this too, right? Because you're a part of this broken vessel, that you have the ability to fix that part of the tikkun that you can do, right? The repair that you can do. Only you can do it. Like there's nobody else who has that piece. There's nobody else. There's nobody else who can fix that piece. They don't have that piece. So, there's some beautiful poetry that some of the poetry I love. Yes. Yeah. That each of us has a piece of the puzzle. And only we have that. And I'll show it to you. But it was written by a more Kabbalistic um, person. And yeah, I mean, I think it was actually, I think it was Rami Shapiro, um, but I'm not positive. But I love poem because it helps me kind of make sense of like why do people come into this world. And here's the here's the poem. I sometimes share it at a funeral, especially when. So here it is. Let me see if it says who said it. I'll find it. Each lifetime is the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. For some, there are more pieces. For others, the puzzle is more difficult to assemble. Some seem to be born with a nearly completed puzzle, and so it goes. Souls going this way and that, trying to assemble the myriad parts. But know this, no one has within themselves all the pieces to their puzzle. Everyone carries with them at least one and probably many pieces to someone else's puzzle. Sometimes they know it and sometimes they don't. And when you present your piece, which is worthless to you, to another, whether they know it or not, you are a messenger from the Most High. Yeah. So that's based on that concept. He called it the pieces of a puzzle because that's the way to explain, one way to explain the broken vessels, the broken pieces. So the world is filled with these, and we have them. You have them. We all have them. And what's interesting is that what he's talking about is a relationship, the Kabbalah of relationships, which is also something we'll talk about next week. That there's a Kabbalistic element to relationships where we understand that, well, the whole concept of a Bashert, the whole concept of finding somebody who's your missing piece, if you will, you complete me, right? Is that yes, there's people who their pieces fit together, and that's how they. That's why they love each other. Now, of course, this is complicated because sometimes they're from the same gender, and the Kabbalists knew this. They knew that sometimes, one man completed another man. It gave pieces to that man. So in that case, obviously, they didn't want to encourage that it was sexual. It didn't have to be sexual. Yeah. No, no.
This for sometimes see people working so well together, like certain actors do a lot of different movies together, and
Yeah,
they seem to fit.
yeah, yeah. It was Lawrence Kushner, by the way, for sure. It was Lawrence Kushner. It's called Jigsaw by Lawrence Kushner, and it's become such a pop. And we'll talk about Lawrence Kushner next week as Kabbalists who've neo Kabbalists who've given us some important teachings from Kabbalah. Lawrence Kushner is one of them because he translated and worked on a lot of publicizing a lot of poetry and reflections on Jewish mysticism on Kabbalah. But this is a really special piece of the puzzle. So so what's interesting about the I mean, again, without blowing your mind too much. So again, sometimes this is relational. This is relational, so that we have that we have somebody who's we feel a sense of wholeness with them because they're helping us, with they've given us that, right? But here's a really interesting idea. And again, so these are so this is from the Zohar. So this is stuff that existed from the 1200s, and then this Eitz Chaim is from Luria through his student Chaim Vital. And then these last couple of texts are from the 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 bridge to the modern world. One of them, the Baal Shem Tov, who's the founder of Hasidism, said, "A small act done with a full heart repairs worlds." And so, one of the things that the Hasidic Jews would often teach is that, like, literally singing with energy, singing or dancing or being happy with energy raises up those sparks, which is something that the Shakers did too, and the Quakers. They believed in dance and movement, and that you could kind of shake up that energy and help elevate the energy. Um, and so that was something they believed, and it's a very important part of Hasidism too, manifested, and maybe again we'll talk about it in great detail with Chabad. It's one of the reasons why you have these people from Chabad that are sit in front of a place and try to get everyone to lay tefillin. Like, what do you care whether someone lays tefillin? What do you care if someone lights Shabbat candles. Chabad Hasidism, like most forms of Hasidism, that came from Baal Shem Tov and after, out of Lurianic Kabbalah, out of this idea of tikkun, is that lighting candles on Shabbat elevates the energy. Putting on tefillin elevates the energy. It literally, even in this little act, and because you can do these little acts, and because they're not really that difficult, but they have an ability to create a seismic change. You'll hear people say that, no, you got to lay tefillin today. I need to get you to lay tefillin. They're not asking you to believe anything, right? They're not asking you to even have you say the bracha, but they're not, they don't, it's not like they, it's not like Jews are trying to run around saying, well, tell me right now you believe in God. Tell me right now, it's not like in Christianity, you have to believe in Jesus. It's not like Islam where you have to say the Shahada. Muhammad is the seal. You, there's nothing like that in Judaism, in the sense that even the Shema isn't that. But instead, there's actions, right? So if you're a Jew who has the ability to put on tefillin and you didn't do it, you didn't have a chance to elevate that spark today. That spark didn't elevate because you didn't do it. And you have the ability to do that. Only you have the ability to do that. So the person can't, I was going to say, the Chabad guy who's trying to make you do that, he can't do that. Only you can elevate that spark that was going to be elevated by you doing the tefillin. He can't put on tefillin 10 times for you. Only you can do it. What you're not, your the energy that exists in this world that needs to get to the higher world, that needs to get back to heaven, that needs to get back into the energy holder, if you will, isn't being done if you don't do it. So the world is hungry, the energy is hungry to be elevated. It wants to be elevated, but it can't unless you help. So that again means that human beings have tremendous power. Again, going back to the slide from the Zohar, when the bone below is aroused, above is aroused. The awakening of human action draws the awakening of the supernal realms. Luria went further than that by talking about these sparks, because he said literally those are the sparks that need to kind of go back to heaven. They need to go back into their place. They need to fill up those vessels again. So the vessel is only fully reassembled when everybody does what they're supposed to be doing in that holy work, in that tikkun olam. So this isn't about being nice to people and social action. Those are all good things. Those are all ways to elevate the sparks for sure. But they literally can be done by saying the bracha. Not only putting it into balance, but fixing it so that, like, when the world will be at peace, which is kind of the messianic vision, is the Messiah essentially is this imbalance where all the pieces have been put back together. So our work is to put everything back together. God is depending on us to do that. And every one of us has to do that. Now, there's implications to this, by the way. Cosmic implications, because the world is waiting on it. The universe can't find its balance until we get there. And again, look, I mean, the positive thing is if you talk to people in Chabad, you talk to people, they believe that we're very close to this era right now. Like, we can do it. Like, they're positive about it. They're not like, oh, we're doomed. They believe that we're getting close. But the problem is, if you're sent into this world and you don't do what you're supposed to do in fixing the world, right? Well, that's a good question. So John just asked if you're a Jew or of anyone. Well, yeah, but so whenever anything bad happens, including their explanation for the Holocaust, is that it's because people had missed the opportunities to do that. I mean, they also believe that the closer we get to the messianic era, the darker it's going to get. Like the worst thing that happened, the Holocaust, was happening because the final pieces were starting to come together, and like all of the negative energy that's been created over the centuries manifested itself. I mean, I'm just telling you how they explain the Holocaust. It manifested itself in Nazism and that. So what happened is all that energy that's trying to stop the restoration went to war because, of course, what's the explanation? What was around the corner? The restoration of Jews to Zion. And most Hasidic Jews, definitely Chabad, who were very pro-Israel, though to an extent, by the way, only to an extent. The Chabad Rebbe never stepped foot in Israel, wouldn't go to Israel, wouldn't go to Israel. The reality is that they are very pro Israel, very passionate about Israel because they believe that Israel is the manifestation of thousands of years of Jewish positive energy getting to the point where we're almost ready for the Messiah. And so the last gasp, if you will, of the negative energy was the Holocaust. And so the positive energy is now here. Like they really don't believe, like the worst in their minds, the apocalypse, the end of the world was the Holocaust. The beginning of the new world is already manifesting right now. That is what the last Chabad Rebbe said, which is why some people thought he's the Messiah. And why, when you go around Israel or you go around Crown Heights, you see signs that say the Messiah lives with his picture on it. So, yes, there's definitely responses, negative responses, but that just further proves that we're living in a time when this is coming to light, that it's coming to reality. It's really like we're so close that we're already seeing it. They call it the footsteps of the Messiah, that we're listening, we can hear the footsteps of the Messiah. But back to the individual, this is a really important idea for an individual because this is a little spooky. If you are in this world, every one of us is in this world to complete certain things, and we don't complete them, then what happens? What do you think? Well, you did. You got the memo. You just got it just now. You did know it. Now it's been explained to you. You felt this. There it is. Esther just said it. Yes. Luria taught that there is something called the Gilgul, the fact that you have a job to do in this world. Your soul is the emissary of that, the energy that exists before you existed in this world and will exist after you will have to come back into this world until you do those things. So unless you fulfill that job that you had in this world of elevating that, and there will be continue to be people who do that. Now here's the weird part about this. It's all weird. I don't know. Maybe, but it'll make sense. Maybe. I don't know. There's a finite number of souls. Once every soul comes through this world to do the things that they're supposed to do, they're done. But when the last soul fixes the last piece of the puzzle, reassembles, then it's all energy again. There's nothing anymore. You're making a face, John. This is the explanation for why there's reincarnation. Correct. And they believe that this um, the supply of the souls, when it runs out, that's when we don't. Then the cycle is over. The cycles of creation and birth cease to exist. Well, then we just keep doing this. We just keep going. Do I? Yeah. Well, eventually the last person, they're, we're going to run out if we get close. Look, we have over 7 billion people now, right? We're going to 8 billion. We're not running out of people. But this explains why people feel that they've been reincarnated. Well, we're already having population control. Our community and many communities in America were already in negative. If it wasn't for people moving to this country, we have negative birth rate in this country. Okay, but we have negative. But for whatever reasons, we might look. Elon Musk says it's a huge problem. He wants there to be more people because he says the birth rate is actually he's concerned about it. I mean, he's not a dumb guy. I mean, you may not like the guy, but he's not a dumb guy. I mean, he's thought this out. He's doing it himself. What? No. What? Yes. Well, it's happening all over Europe. It's happened in Japan for 20 years. It's happening in China at a horrific rate for them because they have no replacement. So when Judaism says that people feel like they've had come back, they would say yes, you come back. Now there are different teachings. Well, not it, yes, well, but so if people have feelings that they've been reincarnated or think they're going to be reincarnated, yes, there's a possibility because your body you didn't do it in this body, so you come back in another body and you'll do it again. Now, there are other teachings along this line that existed in specifically, I would say, in Hasidic Judaism, but I think there were probably elements that were existed in other places. By the way, this concept of the well of souls has been articulated in only one movie that I know of, and it was not a very good movie, but it was a movie that actually had a Talmudic student explaining this to, coincidentally, Demi Moore, which was the seventh seal. Sorry, seventh sign was the Ingmar Bergman was seventh seal. It was a seventh sign. It was a movie where they talked about the end of the world, and it had a very Christological element to it, but it also had a Kabbalistic element. This idea of eventually they would run out of souls. Um, but yeah, this exists. It existed in other forms of Gnosticism, of feeling like, well, if there's energy, does it ever go out? And maybe it comes back and it comes back repeatedly. But there's also a possibility, which I was going to let me finish with this, was that you don't have to come back for a whole run. By that I mean, if there's only one thing you didn't get to do in this world, then maybe you have to just come back. And once you do that, you're then released from the body that you were on. This is a concept that we often refer to as a dybbuk. Now, sometimes dybbuks are seen as evil spirits or malevolent forces. A dybbuk literally means an attached spirit. And there were people who believed that they had a dybbuk because they felt like they had to do certain things that didn't quite make sense. It might have been also explaining some forms of mental illness, but a dybbuk was an attached soul that needed to complete something in this world. Generally speaking, it wasn't evil. It just was riding along, and it wasn't the way things were supposed to be. But the idea is once that spirit could achieve that thing in existence. I'll give you an example. There's actually one of the most famous Jewish plays and Yiddish plays, and was made even into a silent movie, and then other movies, other versions of it. Was called the Dybbuk. Yeah, but there's an Isaac Bashevis Singer version, and there's even an older version too. But the version of the original tale, if you will, or one of the original versions, is that there's the spirit of a man who dies and he's not able to get married in this world. And so he gets attached to another person and is able to go through a marriage. And then once they go through the marriage, then they're able to ascend because they needed to experience that. They didn't get to experience that in this world. Look, I think to some extent it explained mental illness, or not mental illness, but what they would have considered aberrant behavior. For example, like why is a man attracted to a man, another man? It's because he has a Dybbuk who is a woman who never had a chance to be married, and that woman needs to be detached, if you will. Once that woman is detached and goes through a marriage, maybe she'll be elevated, or there's a way to get that Dybbuk off of them. So this was an issue of a spirit or a soul that was needing to come back to do something. And generally, again, it's not evil. It's just you don't really want it. But it also explains, like in a nice way, if somebody didn't get to do something in this world, that they could come back and actually experience it. If they didn't get to do that, they could come back and do it. And so it kind of gave people hope that if somebody died before they had a chance to have love, for example, that they could come back and they would have a chance to experience it. So I think it also explains that in a way, which is this feeling like somebody didn't get to, I felt that a lot. My uncle, who was never married, never had a family, but never had like a real relationship. I said, man, I hope he gets to come back, and I hope his soul gets to have that. Because again, it feels like there's people who just didn't get a chance. They didn't have that chance for whatever reason. So I I think that when we, there's a reason for these beliefs and trying to make sense of these things, but if there's things that only you can do, right, or there's things that you need to do and you don't get to complete them, then maybe you get another chance to come back and complete it. So that's a kind of a hopeful thing to think about. Um, yeah, there's a lot, I know. And the important thing today was, to summarize and to kind of introduce you to Lurianic Kabbalah, which it's it's a system. It's not. I'm not saying it's not. You know, can you live your life as a Jew without ever understanding it? Absolutely, but it explains certain things that you know they people had questions about. Viable. Like it's a legitimate issue for you to say, well, how could God create anything if God is already everything? And how does this stuff feel broken if God is good and God would not create something that was bad? How is it that these things don't seem to work? And the answer is there was a divine screw up at the beginning. It's not a screw up in the sense of like you and I make screw ups, but it didn't go the way God thought it would. And just so you know, when we read Genesis, you'll actually see that flat out where God says, I regret that I made this system. So this one is actually a little bit more spiritual, a little bit more mystical, a little bit more abstract. But the idea that this universe didn't quite go the way God had originally intended to go is definitely why. And one of the books I'll put up, if you want to read it, is called God and the Big Bang, and explains that maybe there's a synthesis between what we know or what we think about the origins of the universe and what we actually, how we approach it as people of faith. Yes, 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 yes. Yeah, no, it's for all people. It's a good question. The answer is that if you're on the left, that one of the teachings is that if you're on the left, oftentimes you'll have these other sides be heightened because you're on the left. A lot of times, again, it's just a matter of trying to keep these things in balance, and we'll talk a little bit more about that next week, because this idea of keeping ourselves in balance is one where we basically say again, the concept in Kabbalah is not to get away from the world, but to go deeper. Don't get out of the world, which is again something you can do if you start to spend too much time on this, you get out of the world, you become wrapped up in it. And Kabbalah is not supposed to do that. It's not, nothing in Judaism is supposed to do that. It's supposed to be engaged in the world. On the other hand, um, again, there's things that don't make sense. So we got to go deeper. We don't leave. We just try to figure it out. And hopefully, again, the more we know about the universe, the more we know about science, the more we'll learn about this too. And that's our hope. That don't turn off our minds. And again, maybe we'll bring these together. So next week we'll talk a little bit about how this actually manifests in the world. Kabbalah Center, how it manifests in music, how it manifests. I already showed you the Madonna thing, but that's not the only one, by the way. That's not the only song, and it's not the only place you'll see these ideas. We'll talk about how this is all around us, and sometimes we're not aware of it. But you'll be aware of it, and now you know what you're looking for. So everybody, take care. We will be online next week, and we'll do some online stuff with us even better. I mean, we're always online, but we'll be able to show you the songs. So take care, and we'll see you on Friday too. If you're around, you can come in person or online for Rick and Addie's Shabbat. So thank you all. Oh, it's a Debbie Friedman Shabbat in honor of her yard site, in honor of her passing. So we're going to be doing some Debbie Friedman songs this week. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right. All right. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.